Hello, wonderful people. You are welcome to our last but not the least episode on this particular topic, adverbs. In our previous lessons, we started talking about adverbs. We've talked about the types, how to form adverbs, and now we are moving on to the last but not the least part of this topic. I've always been your facilitator for the English language, Uncle Gideon. So, without wasting much time, we move on straight to our next topic. And that is comparison of adverbs. So we are going to compare adverbs just as we did in adjectives. I hope you remember that. Big, bigger, biggest. Thank you for that. So in adverbs too, we can do similar comparison. And then the rules we used in forming the comparative and superlatives of adjectives, we can apply those same rules here. So that is what we're going to talk about in this episode. All right, so there are 3 degrees of comparison in adverbs, just as we have in adjectives. That is the positive, the comparative, and the superlative. All right, so how do we go about this? The one-syllable adverbs use ER in the comparative form and EST in the superlative form. And then we have adverbs that end in ly. And those adverbs are mostly formed from adjectives. So they use the words more and most to form their comparatives and superlative, respectively. All right, so these adverbs usually have more than one syllable. That is, the adverbs that use more and then most for their comparative and superlatives, they are mostly more than one syllable word. So mostly they are 3 or more syllable words. I hope you are following. All right, so we move on to how to form the comparative and then the superlative of adverbs. So to our next slide, let's move on. All right, so this is for the one-syllable adverbs. With one-syllable adverbs, as we have said earlier in the previous slide, we add ER to the comparative or to form the comparative, and then EST to form the superlative. But don't forget, in adjectives, we said that if any word ends with Y, and we are forming the comparative, we change the Y to I. And that is how come we have I here. And then I here as well. I hope you remembered. All right. So these are some of the list of the one-syllable adverbs with their comparative and then the superlative forms. So early, earlier, earliest. Fast, faster, fastest. Hard, harder, hardest. High, higher, highest. Late, later, latest. Loud, louder, loudest. Near, nearer, nearest. Soon, sooner, soonest. So this is just but a few of one-syllable adverbs. I hope you have understood this point or up to this point. Let's move on to the 2 or more syllable words and then find how they form theirs as well. So, all right. So like we said early on, adverbs that end in ly or have 3 or more syllables, we said that they use more and then most to form their comparative and superlative respectively. So these words are ending in ly, and they are more than one syllable word. So in their comparative, we use more with the same word or with the same positive form. And with the superlative too, we use most with the same positive form. So angrily, comparative is more angrily, and superlative most angrily. And then brightly, more brightly, most brightly. Freely, more freely, most freely. Gladly, more gladly, most gladly. Heavily, more heavily, most heavily. Loudly, more loudly, most loudly. Quietly, more quietly, most quietly. Sweetly, more sweetly, most sweetly. Terribly, more terribly, most terribly. This is just but a few of words that end with ly. They are comparative and they are superlative. Just as in adjectives, we have words in adjectives that do not follow any of these rules. We have the same thing here, which form their comparative and then superlative irregularly. So let's move on to the next part so that we form or we can find some of them. All right. So some adverbs form their comparatives and superlatives irregularly. And we have a few of them here. Word like badly, the comparative is worse. And then superlative, worst. They don't follow the ly rule, neither do they follow the most and then more rule. But they change their forms because they are irregular. All right, so far, have farther, farthest. And the same far can be further and furthest. And then little, less, least. Much or many, more, most. Well, better, best. I believe you remember this in adjective. Good, better, best. And here we have well, better, and then best. All right. So with this, when do we use comparatives and when do we use superlatives? Let's check out on that one. Okay. So note, the comparative form is used to compare two things, just as we learned in adjectives. When we are comparing only two things, nothing more, nothing less, only two things, that is when we use the comparative form of the adverb. So when we check these examples, we have, you speak more loudly than a loud speaker. You speak more loudly than a loud speaker. Somebody may ask, what are the two things here that we are comparing? First and foremost, you is doing the speaking. So we are comparing you and then loud speaker. So these are the two things we are comparing in this sentence. That is why we used more loudly. We must not reach there later than 7 o'clock. We must not reach there later than 7 o'clock. What are the two things here we are comparing? 7 o'clock and any other time. Though the any other time wasn't stated here. But we are comparing 7 o'clock and any other time. So we must reach there later than 7 o'clock. Comparative. Two things. Not more than two, not less than two. All right. And then the superlative form is also used to compare three or more things. 3 or more things. So, when it is only one thing we are describing, we use the positive form. When we are comparing only 2 things, we use the comparative form. And when we are comparing 3 or more, that is when we use the superlative form. Example: he arrived the earliest. The earliest. So he had to wait for the others. He arrived the earliest, so he had to wait for the others. In this particular sentence, we can boldly say that, or we can assume that there are plenty or there are a lot of people going to meet, but only him got there earliest or got there first. That is why we are using earliest. So, he arrived there earliest. That is the superlative. In the second example, why do you have to speak the most loudly of all at the meeting? This meeting consists of more than 2 people. So probably 3 or more people. And only one person speaks louder than all of them. And because of that, we use most loudly instead of more loudly. This time around, we are comparing 3 or more things. So we use most loudly. I believe at this point, you've understood the comparison of adverbs. But mind you, under no circumstances should you use more and then the est or the er form of the adverb. Under no circumstances should you use the more or most and the est or the er form of the adverb in one sentence. Let me give you an example. Kofi is more taller than Yao. Kofi is more taller than Yao. That is a wrong statement. The reason being that we don't use more and then er word, that is taller, in one sentence. So the correct sentence should be Kofi is taller than Yao and not more taller than Yao. I believe you've understood up to this point. So on this note, we end this episode and then this topic as a whole. All right. So till we meet again in our next video or next episode, make sure you stay safe and sound. Spread calm and not fear. This too shall pass. See you again. Bye-bye.